As always, I'm a little late to the game, but I got the feeling this is something that's going to be in the headlines for a little while and is important to break down anyways. But the Tenet Media being hit with an indictment by the Department of Justice is a very big deal, especially in right-wing circles, and also raised a lot of red flags on the left, so there's a whole conversation with it. But I think there's more of a systemic, the way the media is funded issue at hand that I'm kind of interested to dive into a little bit in today's episode. And today I am joined by returning guest Michael Azevedo of the Making Media Now podcast. Welcome back.
Great to be here, AJ. Good to chat with you.
So, full disclosure, I am the editor for the Making Media Now podcast, so I've heard all 100-something episodes. What are you up to now?
I think we're hovering at around 130.
130. So go check out that feed. There's some interesting conversations in there. I mean, we talk politics here a lot. That's not a political show necessarily, but there's some interesting breakdowns on the media and interviews with documentarians and filmmakers and things like that. And there's some interesting subjects that you should definitely go check out. It's Making Media Now on all your favorite podcast platforms. But
and if you think it sounds great, it's all kudos to AJ. And if you think it sounds like crap, it's all blame to AJ. How's
exactly. That? Sounds like my life. All right, so I'll link this in the episode description if you want more of a breakdown. If somehow you didn't hear about this indictment, but right wing. This is from the Associated Press. Right wing influencers were duped to work for covert Russian operation. U.S. says, and this is Tenet Media, which is based in South Carolina or something
Tennessee.
like that.
Tennessee.
Tennessee, and they basically were funding all sorts of right-wing oriented and, if not right-wing, kind of anti-establishment, center-left sort of individuals like Tim Pool, Lauren Southern. There's all sorts of players in there, but it was Lauren Chen and her husband who were taking money from Russian operatives and not disclosing that this is foreign money coming in. That on its own, terrible. I mean, if you're, especially with, let alone all the issues going on in Ukraine, before all of that, to even consider taking any money from anywhere just for ethical purposes, I mean, should immediately be a red flag and no, you should run far, far away. I mean, would you say?
Yeah, well, I mean, particularly, I'm gonna pose this hypothetical to you, AJ. I send you an email and I say, hey, man, I like your stuff. How about if I start paying you $100,000 per video? You good with that? And you only have to make one a month.
Oh, no questions. I'd have no questions.
Yes, exactly. I'm wondering if one of the first three questions that comes to mind after offshore accounts is who are you people?
Yeah, I mean, it was, I could see on one side with a couple of the hosts that were involved. I think Tim Pool, like him or hate him, I'm not necessarily a big Tim Pool fan. I like some of the guests he has on his show, but he was friends with Lauren Chen, I mean, and I think that's kind of the situation with a lot of them, where they were kind of in same right-wing circles that said, oh, this is generally how much it costs for an advertising. But the sketchy thing about that, this was not just paying for advertising. This is paying for reposting of the content on separate channels that were getting less than 5,000 views per hit, which is that's nothing. I mean, that's basically not getting seen, especially when you're considering the figureheads that were being seen on these that are being used as the hosts on these shows.
Yeah. I mean, I've never listened to any of them. The only Tim Pool, Dave Rubin, I've heard more only when he's been a guest on other shows, and I've seen him. I think it's been a while, but he used to be a semi-regular guest on Bill Maher's show on HBO. And who was Benny Johnson? No, I've never listened to him.
Yeah, like
maybe
Benny is
a clip or two that filtered into my Twitter feed. So I didn't have strong opinions about any of them. It was kind of Keystone Cops in the sense, I think that, wow, I'm getting $400,000 a month to post these videos that hardly anyone's watching. I mean, if you just know the intricacies of who rises to the top in podcasting, and YouTube videos, it's a fairly select club, particularly relative to the literally millions of people who are putting content out there.
Yeah, I think these guys all got duped because I think they really played up the relationship factor and kind of framed it more as advertising as opposed to licensing, which is very naive on their part. They really should have considered what exactly is being paid for in this contract. It's going to be really messy going forward on that. But I think there's more
to quote everybody's favorite felon/nominee, Russia, if you're listening and you want to dupe me to the tune of $100,000 an episode.
Just do a little better job hiding that it's come from Russia.
Let's talk. Where is Moose? My favorite part of this story was, and I can't even remember their names, and if I did recall them, I wouldn't be able to pronounce them. But one of these guys, I guess, was posing as being located in Paris. But the timestamp was revealing that he wasn't, and then his Google search, the first thing that came up was current time in Paris.
So it's like he wanted to be indicted. This foreign actor. It's just so stupid. The whole thing sounds stupid. And how did you guys not realize this?
But I think to maybe get into the area that you're really trying to talk about is the intention, on the part of the Russians. I mean, this is, I think, all told around $10 million or something that you're talking about, which is, of course, chump change when it comes to spycraft and whatnot. But the intention of the Russians is to make information, the whole aggregate American information pool, unreliable, and unreliable from both sides, right? To strip all notion of objective truth. It's not that I need you to buy the lie. I need you to suspect the truth.
There is this way of running a media organization where it's like what I'm doing here, what you do over at Making Media Now, you're doing a specific show, you're doing something in particular, and you hope people to find it. It's kind of the influencer mechanism of building traction for an audience. No matter what, in my opinion, you can only go so far with that when it comes to kind of mainstream everyone appeal. There will be the Joe Rogans. There will be people like that that will just go elevate way beyond it. But to build a media empire that is truly successful, you need to have culture and entertainment as a part of it in some way. Yeah. And an example of an outlet on the right, mainly because in my opinion, it's extraordinarily rare to see this on the right, is the Daily Wire. What they're doing over there, they have the comment section, which is an internet first, hey, here's the memes and all that sort of show. They're getting into movie studios, they're getting into children's content. That's how you build a media empire to push a narrative. And at least You may hate them, a lot of what they do over there.
Honestly, when it comes I don't really, aside from the name and some of the affiliation, I guess just to go back to Making Media Now for a moment, and this, but, for the clarity of anybody who's interested. So Making Media Now is sponsored by an organization called Filmmakers Collaborative. And Filmmakers Collaborative's its business model is simply it provides fiscal sponsorship to any documentary that wants to get foundation money or public or private money. So in other words, they act as kind of the safekeeper. So in other words, say you were going to make a documentary, right, about what XYZ, and you came to me and said, here's my idea for a documentary, and I like your idea, and I'm going to give you $50,000, right? Well, as the person giving you the $50,000 to put toward your documentary, I want to make sure that you don't have a line item in your budget that says $45,000 for a new truck or something, not that you can buy one for $45,000. But Filmmakers Collaborative essentially holds the books, runs the books, keeps the budget. That's the business model. Building out from that, what I've done over the last 3 years or so with the podcast, probably about 40% of my guests have some affiliation with Filmmakers Collaborative, meaning they've come through FC to help get their films funded. by that very definition, I could see how somebody would maybe look at the guest roster, look at the subject matter of the documentaries and say, okay, left-leaning, right? And as you just said, you've listened to 130 of these almost, whether you like to or not. We actually rarely talk about politics. However, if you come away, I think you would be hard-pressed to come away from listening to more than a handful of them and not get a sense of, what side of the street I might be tending to walk on. And like everybody else, I like to compliment myself and say, well, you know what? What I'm really for is like a no bullshit party, because it's not left or right, but of course there's subjectivity in that. And, you and I, we've often had exchanges about this guest or that guest. And I wouldn't disagree with you on, maybe say one particular thing comes to mind. I think probably about 6 months ago or so, there was a film. It was called 1,000 Pines or 10,000 Pines, but it was about these guest workers that came from Mexico. And they would move around the South as itinerant workers. They literally hand planted these pine trees, and the pine trees would be harvested, once a year. These guys would move on. Well, that's a microcosm wherein somebody could begin to have a conversation, I guess, about immigration policy, right? In a temporary stay, as I said, guest worker. And in that documentary, the owner of these orchards, these 1,000-acre orchards, he's saying, like, you can't get on me for hiring these people. Nobody in not just my town, nobody in my state wants these jobs. It's backbreaking work. You're hand digging these holes. So I tell that story because I think that that's an example of where the human story is used, and I think in the case of this film, very subtly to illustrate a larger point. And I think the point that they're trying to illustrate is simply illustrating the humanity in it, as opposed to, the caricature.
And as opposed to the manipulative way that the Russians did with the Tenet Media side of things, too. And for the record, that is 1,000 Pines, which is, do a Google search, you can find that film.
1,000 Pines? Okay, yeah.
You were close, It's because telling a story matters, and you can't just have we can play two-dimensional drawing up of people forever, but the three-dimensional is what's really interesting to people, and it's the reason why. Ultimately, it's I'm going to go to politics. I'm always going to go to politics. That's what it comes down to, like Hillary Clinton not being able to be successful. She was this two-dimensional character that everyone had a decision on one way or another. It's the one thing that Trump has fought, is he gets seen as this two-dimensional character, and within the right he does a pretty good job at crafting a story to his audience, but he does a really crappy job with trying to get anyone outside of that group to do it. And I really think that's the mission of what the Russians were trying to do with this Tenet Media operation, was to expand beyond the story of just the political narrative of the day, the 24-hour news cycle, and say, hey, we're going to play up these characters, these Jim Rubens and such, and say, it's like, we're going to push the cultural side, because alongside that cultural story is going to be the political opinions we're hoping to drive more into the mainstream, which some of them are, some aren't.
If specific to what the Russian objectives would be, you could probably boil it down to, let's stoke cultural division in the hopes that it has a political outcome. And in the hopes that it has a political outcome that's going to benefit their objectives vis-a-vis Ukraine.
Yeah, definitely. And something that's kind of something that really bothers me with Courier Newsroom, that's the name of the organization. Mm-hmm. So it's for anyone thinks that I'm just being some conspiracy theorist, this organization was literally created as a left-wing outlet. I mean, that was the organizers of Courier Newsroom outright said from the get-go that if you look, so we're in New Hampshire here, the Granite Post is one of those outlets that is an affiliate of it. If you look on their About Us page, the publisher is the publisher for Courier Newsroom, and you go look at her LinkedIn. I mean, she's very one-sided with what she's doing, and I think what they've done a really good job, and I really hate personally, but I understand why it works, is they play up the softball news stories of the day within their respective state that they're in, because they're only in battleground states, pretty much, this Courier Newsroom, when you look at their state-level operations. So it's something that Colin Booth, who is the editor over there, got a bunch of flack for, I'll put a link to this so people know what I'm talking about, too, but Michigan Governor Gretchen Whitmer doing meet and greet with Kamala Harris supporters and Pappy's Pizza in Manchester, got a chance to chat, and among other things, asked what her Dunkin' order was while visiting the Granite State. It's kind of the BS we used to always get from the mainstream cable media when people were paying more attention to them on a daily basis, and the broadcast news in the mornings, a lot of those sorts of stories. I don't think people have as much of a taste for it as much anymore, and it can really drive people nuts. I could be wrong in that, but I mean, that's the sort of thing they're using.
How long has Courier been around?
They've been around, it was post-Trump getting elected is when they started developing, I think. It's been a few years.
And so there's, I actually hadn't heard of them until you sent me the email a few days ago, and I went and I checked them out. And so it kind of looks to me like there's that umbrella organization, Courier Media, and they have these almost like subsidiaries, Granite Post, et cetera, in these sites. Do you have any sense of how they're tracking, since 16?
I mean, they're doing well because ultimately a lot of the left-wing online landscape really did not succeed well after Trump got out of office.
Who or what, in your opinion, populates the left-wing landscape, media landscape? The whole,
I'll answer that quickly in a second, but I mean, I think they're filling a hole that Vox was filling back in the day in the Huffington Post. Okay. Vox, I don't think exists anymore. They do. And HuffPo.
It's funny you say HuffPost because that was what I thought of immediately when I went to their site. I'm like, this feels like Huffington Post, like in like 2010 or so.
Yeah, and I'm pretty sure one of the founders came from HuffPo, and that's part of the reason why. So it was started by Tara McGowan, who was, let me see, we'll do a little Huffington. No, it doesn't show up, but there's a couple other players in there. Sorry, I should have done a little
and for me, Huffington Post, it just kind of lost its allure.
Yeah.
When anytime, and again, this is just me talking, regardless of the platform I'm going to, if I'm going there and I absolutely know what to expect, I'm going to start going there less. Because if it's just confirmation bias, I just find it less interesting. The writing tends to be less engaging. The thinking isn't really there on paper. It's more agitprop or it's just kind of, RNC or DNC talking points. And the problem is alternative media, way too much of alternative media. Everyone's trying to hit the home run. No one is interested in getting this, hitting the single to keep the baseball analogy. And to my estimation, the single is we're going to have a conversation. I'm not trying to convince you of anything. I'm going to tell you what I think to be the facts of this scenario. How do you interpret those facts? Oh, that's interesting. See, this is how I interpret them. But once we start assigning motive immediately based on the political affiliation of the person presenting their data or their facts, or whatever you want to call it, then you're not really interested in conversation. You're just, you're interested in beatdowns that hopefully drive agitation, which, has come to be the definition of far too much alternative media.
It's been funny considering the format that I do here, but I've kind of grown tired of pundits doing interviews. I've found them to become the most reductive and just simpling down of things that are very complex and useless. Like it's beginning to. So I listen to Ben Shapiro on a daily basis. Foreign policy aside, and whatever. Breaking Points, which is a mix of left and right wing opinion. Podcast of the Lotus Eaters, which is a British kind of right-wing podcast, more internet-aware show. But I really don't care about anything whenever they have interviews on. Because I got sometimes, at least when it's with pundits, like sometimes they'll get like a guest in that is someone that we're kind of getting that first level of news. Like it's kind of like this is an informational, newsy sort of interview versus kind of we're doing a breakdown of something I've already been hearing for weeks on end.
Yeah, I mean, particularly if it's, podcaster to podcaster having those conversations. No, I'm out immediately on those. And I think Shapiro was the only one that I was familiar with that you said. But, in my sort of podcasting diet, I would think, are you familiar with Sam Harris?
Yeah.
So his podcast is called Making Sense. Now, he's not a pundit. He pisses off the left and the right. He's I would say he's probably a progressive leaning centrist. He certainly pisses off the right with his take on Israel and jihadism, and really, and he's certainly no friend of the woke left by any means. And I'm sure he annoys the right because he finds Trump just 1,000% unacceptable. And his litmus test was super simple. He's like, you cannot be the leader of a democratic government if you have in advance said, I'll let you know whether I decide the outcome of an election. That was his litmus test. He was always poo-pooing the legitimacy of the Russia investigation and the aftermath of the 2016 election. So I'm not saying he's the be-all and end-all when it comes to podcasting, but his conversations tend to be long, and it's designed to get into the weeds, right? And so it's going to force you to maybe learn something that you hadn't before.
There's this interesting trend that's really developed over the last 10 years or so where it's philosophy, political philosophy, classics, things like that, or just more general breaking down. I mean, it's part of what I do here on this show a bit is breaking down of more than just saying, hey, here's the news, this is my opinion on it, oh, we're done. it's like no, like there's multiple sides. It's like my last video on this feed is a 12-minute video where I talked about the problems I see of empathy when it comes to both how Republicans and Democrats handle political narratives.
Which I think is fascinating because I hear that, and I see that's a way in to a conversation, a topic that I find endlessly fascinating. And the topic is, how do people come to believe what they believe? Are you revealing to me your politics? Are you revealing to me your psychology? Are you revealing to me the cultural environment that you were brought up in? And I'm super interested in that without judgment. Judgment is boring because it's easy.
And that's one thing I really like about the Breaking Points podcast, which I really think you should check out. But my favorite, so every Wednesday, it's regular, Crystal Ball and Sagar and Jetty are the hosts and owners of the outlet.
Okay, I didn't realize that.
I bet you know who she is. Ugh. Yep. Sorry.
Who's the other dude?
Sagar and Jetty. He used to work. He's been around forever. They were both at the Hill before going independent and starting the show. So on Wednesdays they have a show called Counterpoints, and I find that show so much more interesting because it's Ryan Grimm, who is this hippie dude reporter who does foreign policy reporting, and he loves fish, and he's a total hippie dude, out of time. It's just hilarious. He's an amazing reporter, and he's likable. Like he gives his analysis where I disagree with a lot of what he says, but he breaks it down in a way that I can understand where the progressive left can actually understand, we can understand where they're coming from on it. And then on the other side of it, he has a young conservative woman who is Emily Jashinsky, who is now over at Unheard, which is kind of an independent outlet that does analysis and a little bit of reporting and stuff. But they disagree on a ton, but she comes from a more traditional conservative religious background, but is very pragmatic in how laws should be made and analysis of everything and how we got to get along. And it's like that back and forth is just fascinating to hear on a regular basis, because neither one of them are the traditional host sort of person. Like
I think a little while back you mentioned, sort of like political philosophy, et cetera. And, I think one of the things that will be the eventual undoing of a lot of alternative media is this conceit of the now. Like no, it's never been this way before. No one's ever had this strong an opinion or the ability to express it. No, man, it's all derivative of certain forces at play that have been at play for thousands of years, right? You're basically talking about the dynamics of power, across the board, and you do yourself as a consumer of media, and I think as a purveyor of media, a disservice if you just want to carve it up in a way that the buzzwords sound like those buzzwords that, tickle your amygdala and make you feel like, well, we stuck it to the libs, or we, stuck it to the fascists or whatever.
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, going back to our original discussion on this, I mean, that's I think that is kind of why I find what Courier is doing is especially like the ick factor. You always hear about the ick factor. That's the ick factor for me. Is I think
but from a business perspective, though. So
it's amazing from a business and political perspective. Right. Genius, but I hate it.
Right, exactly. But this is total supposition on my part. But X number of years ago, did somebody sit back and say, "Hey, do you guys see what Sinclair Broadcasting is doing? They're actually going out to their hundreds of affiliates with prepackaged programming. They have spokespersons that aren't even journalists. They're not local to the market that the journalist is supposedly broadcasting from, and they've got the conservative talking points, and you can build a story around to support a conservative talking point, just like you can to present a progressive talking point. And it just seems to me like the Couriers of the world said, "See what they're doing? We can do that."
Yeah, 100%.
Who gets served? Who does that serve? That's the bigger question.
Yeah, and I think it doesn't. I don't think that. It just serves as a funnel to get to. Once again, it's a funnel to those political opinions and manipulations that you're trying to get. And I don't say manipulations in a negative way necessarily, but I mean, the goal of politics is to get people to side with you and to vote on election day with the person you want to have the policies you want.
Manipulation is happening 24/7. I don't care if you spend your whole day on YouTube watching clips from The Office. You're being manipulated. That writer said, "How can I get this person to laugh?" That's manipulation. It's not always nefarious.
Exactly. All right.
Oh, I have a question about your 12-minute rant, right? Mm-hmm. The proposition being that liberals tend to be more emotion-driven, and that what conservatives should use some of that to do what? Because you were saying that conservatives need to display compassion and liberals need to dry their tears.
I mean, ultimately, my bigger problem right now is driven by a local issue, where we have the Libertarian Party of New Hampshire that is overly aggressive and saying terrible things just to motivate their very limited base. Ultimately, they have a very limited base. You don't fix our political equation by feeding to the lowest common denominator and having your base. I mean, it's the issue with Trump strategically. That's what he's doing, the same thing. Like, he's just driving people that are his base instead of expanding past that. So I I hate that. Like, I think we need to start moving past that. We were told with Trump, we finally got an alleged conservative populist in office, at least when it comes to policy making. We're going to start moving past that, when it didn't. He just kept turning up the heat to the point where he ended up losing an election to a half-dead guy in the basement. Like we didn't learn any lessons from it. So my point with me is I've made the same points forever about the left with the way they decide, and I think it's very much, I understand where they come from. And I think the right needs to approach it more from the, I understand where you come from. I'm sorry this bad thing is happening, but, as opposed to, hi, that's happening to you, I don't really care, vote for us, and laugh at that guy for making some stupid mistake or having something happen in their life that may or may not be within their control. And that messaging needs to be fixed on the conservative side.
Yeah, but it's really only fixable if, as a party or an ideology, you actually do have something more to offer than I'm going to give you permission to punch down. But once I get to the point of crafting policy, I'm siding with the oligarchs, because that's where my allegiance truly lies. So if there's the opportunism of faux populism that evaporates the minute you get behind, the Resolute desk, then the next time around, it gets very difficult to grow that base. And so you've got to dig deeper on the outrage.
100%. Yeah. And that's why I always say, and one of the big reasons why, outside of me needing to make this A or B selection on election day, I am not a populist. I spoke very vehemently against Trump after he lost the election and was doing the Stop the Steal nonsense. And on the other side with Harris, like, I think she's approaching it from the left side because she's seeing it's working, and her staff are using those sorts of things like, Trump said this thing that got really popular. Oh, I'm going to use that too, like the not taxing tips and things like that. She's someone who is swayed with the wind every time, and it's a very kind of populist feel. It's the reason why J.D. Vance is not. I don't think he's going to be a viable candidate in 4 years, because he sways with the winds and where popular opinion goes. He's a very smart guy. I'm hoping he outgrows it, but he's young. I think we need to get back down to ethics. We can have ethical discussions over political matters is the only way we can find a compromise, maybe. Because if we're just swaying with the wind with no real basis for what anyone believes, we're not able to go anywhere.
You know what? This is one issue that I think is a really good microcosm for what you're talking about is campaign finance reform. Right? You can easily get a Republican and a Democrat to agree that we need campaign finance reform. They may define it differently, but both parties will say, you first. You first. I'm not going to go into this fight unarmed. So that's why it never changes. And what I'm trying to say that's analogous to is let's just call it a media outlet, whether it be alternative or mainstream. What you're proposing and what I'm applauding is have the courage to build an audience that might come away from a broadcast not feeling like their worldview was applauded. Maybe it was challenged, but maybe it was challenged, and in that challenging, it allowed them to broaden their perspective. You're going to win some, you're going to lose some, but moreover, you're going to be enlightened. That's a bigger ask of the audience, and so therefore, it could be a whole lot longer in building that audience, but it is certainly a differentiator. It's like when I always think about because everybody loses their mind around these, like the Sunday morning shows. You ever read Twitter like around 2 p.m. and there's all the slamming on, Meet the Press and Face the Nation and the This Week on ABC. Do you know how easy it would be for somebody to say, here's the deal. We're going to have an interview show, but there is no filibustering allowed. In fact, we've prepared a package of B-roll that the minute you start to filibuster, we're just going to the B-roll. And that, actually, who used to do this really well? Bill O'Reilly with his no spin zone. And then it got to a point where the only people that weren't allowed to spin were good. He only had guests on from one side of the aisle, unfortunately. But in the beginning, he was very nonpartisan in the no spin zone. And that's because that's when Fox was a up and comer, kind of scrappy. They needed to differentiate themselves. I think that's an opportunity.
I think everything you just said, all the issues there have a root. Oh, we're going to use the lefty word, the systemic issue at hand, but the systemic issue at hand that I've called out since I've started this friggin' show is corporate takeover. Like, we have a huge corporate issue in this country. It's the reason why I'm much more libertarian when it comes to many things, as opposed to conservative and free market first and foremost. The individual needs to be protected a lot. Is the corporate takeover of industries across multiple industries, to the point where when do you lose your voice? I had one of the kids that was going for a union for their Starbucks location. I had him on and applauded him afterwards. I agree with nothing this kid says outside of that, but I think we should applaud the people that are able to break these systems. The reason why I'm happy I took a huge audience loss of leaving a radio station as a regular paid contributor was I felt pressure. Like, I was only able to talk about certain things, and it was changing the narrative of what I could do with this program when I make no bones about it. I have a political motivation behind this program.
Yeah. Well, I also think that the forgotten player oftentimes in these conversations is the responsibility that the writ large, the audience, really needs to take upon themselves. The fact of the matter is, your radio station would have been, begging you to stay if they felt it was in their financial best interest to have that type of conversation, right? And I think that, we're how many generations deep right now where our nation asks nothing of us, absolutely nothing, aside to be consumers, compliant consumers, right? When do people ask more of themselves around, how do I gain information? How do I inform myself? It may still, and it likely will, human nature being what it is, end up with a conversation like you and I might have, looking at the same issue, but you're going to interpret information one way, I'm going to interpret information another way. But if we can enter that conversation believing that each of us come to it in good faith, then that's an evolutionary plus.
100%. All right, we got to wrap it up here, Michael.
Wrap it up.
Got to wrap this up. So, Michael is the host of Making Media Now. Definitely go check out the show. I enjoy editing those. There's some interesting conversations that happen in those, and some surprising perspectives you may not expect. So, and it's always interesting to hear those as they come out. So, thanks so much for joining me.
Fight the power.
All right, NewEnglandTake.com.
Always a pleasure, man. See you soon.
Yeah, I appreciate it. NewEnglandTake.com to get more from the show. Like and subscribe. We post the audio on all major podcast platforms now, so check it out. Hey, if you didn't like it, hit the downvote button and subscribe. Maybe I'll do better next week. There's no promises. I'm still going to be terrible, but I might be entertaining. All right, talk to you next week.